And I'm delighted that my next guest, or my first guest, in fact, is Michael Sukkar, who's the MP, the Liberal MP for Deakin. He's in our Melbourne studio and sitting there on the big screen. Michael, how are you?
Good to be with you, Rowan. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Now, listen, the reason I wanted you on tonight, Michael, is you spoke on Thursday a terrific speech in Parliament where you talked about the BDS campaign against Israel. Now, a lot of people have probably heard the BDS, they get references to it, they know a bit about it, but just take us through it, Michael. What is the BDS campaign? Where did it begin and why is it so insidious?
Well, Rowan, I outlined in my speech the fact that it's been 15 years since the seeds of BDS was first planted, I suppose, at the Durban Conference, 2001, a UN conference. And then that later morphed into the BDS campaign from about 2005 onwards. And in effect, BDS is really a fringe group of different groups around the world that seek to place economic sanctions on Jewish businesses, people that trade with Israel. And it's quite an insidious movement because it seeks to arbitrarily impose what I would describe as economic distress on Jewish people and those businesses without any real regard for who they are or their political views necessarily. I mean, often these are, quite frankly, businesses that have no political affiliations. In Melbourne, we saw a couple of years ago a radical group of socialists and other sort of protesters or groups that sort of protest at the drop of a hat trying to blockade a Max Brenner cafe. That was the most obvious example locally for us, and that protest and that blockade went very badly and sent, I think, a message to the Australian people that this was not a group that had noble aspirations. And I concluded in my speech on Thursday that the BDS movement has been categorically rejected by the Australian people and is a fringe movement. But the reason why I thought it was important to discuss was that there was a Labor member, Melissa Park from Fremantle, who in the Parliament stated her support for BDS, and that was quite extraordinary because to date both mainstream parties, the Liberal Party and the Labor Party, have had great support for Israel and it has been a bipartisan support for Israel. So the fact that a Labor backbencher was able to get up and speak in support of BDS was quite extraordinary, and extraordinary.
I think that is extraordinary, Michael, and you're absolutely right. And it's very dangerous how certain members of the Labor Party, we've seen it with Bob Carr, we've seen it with Tony Burke, who was on Sky this evening. He didn't talk about Israel. But in the past, I'll give you a quote, Tony Burke, back in 2014, as recently as 2014, speaking about to the Friends of Palestine, an organisation, he said, for those who are political advocates within Palestine itself, I will never know the bravery that comes with putting your life on the line and at risk in engaging in politics in different ways. Now, Tony Burke has never rescinded that comment. I don't know what he was getting at there, but certainly I would imagine that there would have been people in the audience of the Friends of Palestine who saw that in ways that perhaps weren't intended, but in ways which it would be obvious that you would draw those conclusions. Omar Barghouti, who was behind the BDS, you've referred to him. He opposes a Jewish state. No Palestinians ever no Jews would ever be allowed in the state of Israel. I refer to both of these things because we get a lot of anti-Semitism within the BDS movement, and the moment Labor and the Greens start flirting with this movement and other very aggressively pro-Palestinian movements, anti-Semitism creeps in. Is that not the case?
Absolutely. And you can tell a lot about the BDS movement by who they associate with and, in fact, who are the people that are the main drivers behind it. And you've referenced Omar Barghouti. I mean, he has stated time and time again that there is no place for any Jews in the Middle East, or certainly within the borders of, as he would say, of Palestine. And these are the people that, you know, when Tony Burke, as you say, references courageous groups of people who, you know, in a sense it's just a dog whistle, he is ultimately referring to people like Omar Barghouti or Mahmoud Abbas, who has time and time again said that in his view a future Palestinian state would not include one Jew. And in fact, I mean, in the Palestinian constitution, it's stated that the ultimate goal is to have a 100% Arab state that is governed by Sharia law.
Absolutely, Michael, and I'll tell you something.
People.
Exactly, and I'll tell you something else, Michael. I was on a trip to Israel last year, one of these ones that gets talked about in the news. We spent a morning in Ramallah with the PLO, where I had 6 other journalists, Australian journalists, with us. We quizzed the PLO very, very closely, and their idea of a two-state solution is one state called Palestine that has no Jews under Sharia law, like you said, and another state which, to quote the PLO, you can call it whatever you want, but it can only have a handful of Jews in it. So that was their idea. There is no Jewish state. So the two-state solution, as the PLO understand it, involves no Jews virtually. Now, why this is important, again, it comes back to if we want to see peace between Israel and Palestine, which we all want to see, the way to do it is to bring them together, not to play into the hands of the extremists, which Labor and the Greens keep threatening to do, and some of them do. Let me just give you one fact, Michael, which you may not be aware of. Every day, 120,000 Palestinians cross into Israel and back again. 120,000 every day. They have done that for the last 10 years. They come to jobs in Israel, Israeli jobs provided for Palestinians. Each one of those 120,000 people supports probably half a dozen other people. So you've got nearly 500,000 people per day who come in and out, whose livelihoods depend on coming in and out of Israel and working for Israel. In 10 years, Michael, do you know how many of those 500,000 people have performed terrorist attacks against Israel? One. 1 in 10 years, one person. The point being that it is jobs and the creation of Israelis and Palestinians working together that brings peace. So why would you try and destroy jobs like the BDS movement does, which can only inflame hatred and therefore make the problem far worse?
Look, you're very right, Rowan. I mean, often the people that are hurt most by these purported sanctions and other sort of economic issues that are placed on these businesses are the Palestinian people. You rightly point out there are literally hundreds of thousands of them that rely on the economic powerhouse of the Middle East, which is Israel. And we should never, ever forget, and we can never say it enough, quite frankly, and that is that Israel is the only true democracy in the Middle East. And that's why for many, many years, both sides of Australian politics have been staunch defenders and supporters of Israel. And that's why it's very concerning that whilst there are good people in the Labor Party like Michael Danby and even Bill Shorten, who are good friends of Israel, they are fighting an uphill battle against, as you say, the Tony Burkes and the Tanya Pliberseks of the world, who are more and more aligning themselves with these fringe groups, often socialist fringe groups that are engaging in these BDS activities. So really one of the catalysts for my speech on Thursday was to try and emphasise the egregious examples that BDS has been involved in a way of trying to perhaps kickstart more of a discussion of the good people in the ALP to reassert themselves and to ensure that we once again have a position where both sides of Australian politics are friends of Israel. Now, we are not completely blind to everything, and our stated policy is a two-state solution. Julie Bishop has said that on many occasions. The Prime Minister has as well. But
I'll just pause you there, Michael, because I just want to say one thing that you brought up there, and that's the bipartisanship, which is fantastic, and it's great, the things you've mentioned. However, I'll just say for our viewers who don't know Michael Sukkar, he is a Lebanese-Norwegian Australian. Now, you don't get more multicultural or multiracial than that result of Lebanese, Norwegian, Australian, fifth generation, whatever you want to call it. This is the modern Australia. Michael, you represent it. I would hope, and this is, you don't have to answer this because we'll have to go to a break in a second, but I hope you would also have a word with your Craig Lowndes, who is your Assistant Minister on your side of politics for multicultural affairs, who doesn't seem to have quite the same open mind that you bring to anything to do with Israel and Palestine. Michael Sukkar, Sukkar, thank you very much. It's been great talking to you, and I hope we see you again on Sky soon.
Thanks so much for having me, Rowan.
Okay, mate.